That reminds me of that story that your dad told me about the time your high school principal called and said there were strong rumors out of Douglas that Frank is cross-dressing at night. Do you want to tell that story?
Ian's a dick.
So there, let's get back into the Limelight Effect.
Who's Cartwright?
I'm Cartwright.
You're not Cartwright.
Of course I'm not Cartwright! I mean, would it kill you not to be so funny all the time? That's all I'm asking. This woman thinks I'm very funny, and now you're going to be funny, so what am I going to be? I'm going to be a short, bald guy with glasses who suddenly doesn't seem so funny. I'm not treating you to lunch anymore! You had to tell Julie that I made a special point of telling you that I bought you the big salad, didn't you? You know, if it was a regular salad, I wouldn't have said anything. But you had to have the big salad!
George, is this funny?
It's funny. Why couldn't you make me an architect? You know I always wanted to pretend that I was an architect. I'm an architect.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, what do you design?
Railroads.
I thought engineers do that.
They can. It's not a lie, if you believe it.
What do you do?
I'm an architect.
You designed any buildings in New York?
Have you seen the new addition to the Guggenheim?
You did that?
Yep. It didn't take very long either. I'm also an architect. Elaine, bald men with no jobs and no money who live with their parents don't approach strange women. I'll tell you something. I wish there were pigmen.
We all know a George Costanza. And in fact, we are all George Costanza in some little light. Today's episode is about the Limelight Effect, or locus of control. When things happen in our life, do we take credit for it, or do we explain it away, good or bad? We talk about how this can impact our careers. We talk about this in leadership. We talk about what it's like being around someone on either spectrum. And we really dive into the fact that Frank is more of an external limelight guy, and Ian is all about the internal. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. And if you haven't shared this with one of your friends, what in the world are you waiting for?
You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Matthews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
You can't say God.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Frankie!
Ian, you son of a bitch!
What's going on, buddy?
How are you today?
I'm pretty damn good. My back's a little sore, didn't get great sleep tonight, so if I don't have a great podcast, you can't really blame me. It's not my fault.
That is foreshadowing for what we're going to talk about today.
We are getting better at this podcast thing. Do you like that intro?
It's real. What an incredible lead-in. Hey, Ian, I wanted to tell you we had a groundbreaking moment. I got our first piece of fan mail. A friend of mine who I've known for years sent us our first ever appreciation. It was something we talked about in podcasts. My buddy from Charlottesville, Mr. Dubeck. Thank you for this. I will send you a note and reach out. But I know you've read that book. It's Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. I have not read it. I'm excited to, but it's a groundbreaking moment. Now let's make some
Aurelius
excuses.
was not a man big on excuses. He was a very accountable person. The opposite of another hero of ours, one George Costanza. And I think this episode, the main title is going to be The Limelight Effect, but really this is the Costanza episode. And we are excited to start talking a little more Seinfeld. So Frank, why do Americans love George Costanza so damn much?
So I think it's because he's a theatrical representation of everyone's worst. It's like a really hysterical way to summarize the worst that's in all of us. And when we were talking about this episode, this is kind of like micromanaging, right? Certain things you micromanage, certain things you don't. That's kind of how life is. In this episode, we're going to talk about the limelight effect. Like, is it an internal limelight or an external limelight? We'll define what that is. George lives in the world of the external limelight, and they just use such ridiculous stories where he does everything humanly possible to let everything bounce off of him. Nothing is ever his fault. He was born under a bad sign. He had the wrong parents. He was too short. The water was too cold. He was too close to the fire, whatever. Like, everything always comes down to it's a complete and total BS excuse. And that's what's painted his life. And what's hysterical is he has these alter egos. He's either a marine biologist or an architect, because he's so full of crap that he never talks about what he really does. He just talks about this alter universe that he wishes he was a part of.
And in some ways, George is incredibly accountable when he's with his friends, right? He'll admit that nothing ever goes my way. I'm short, I'm bald, no one likes me. Like, he can be honest about a lot of his flaws, but in other ways, the world is against him. Fate is against him. I've always thought that everyone loves George Costanza because, one, we all know a Costanza. And so when we see George, he's like a really obnoxious version of a Costanza that we know, usually someone in our family or someone that we just talked to who is always coming up with an excuse or a reason why their life isn't going better. But I also think there's just a little bit of George in all of us. And
absolutely.
And I think when we talk about this effect, when we break into it a little, people really, I think there's spectrums of accountability with most people. I think it is very rare to find someone who is just 100% accountable. And it's rare to find someone who can't be accountable for anything. Now, I think it's a little bit harder to find a little easier to find the person who's not accountable often than it is the person who's always accountable for 100% of things. But I think what we're going to talk about today is just the human nature of feeling in control or out of control. And I really want to delve into what kind of tactics that we can use to get ourselves back into a locus of control where we feel like we're in charge of our life.
So before we get into that, Ian, I want to bring something up. What you talked about is like the extreme examples, right? Like the extreme examples of someone who's always in the limelight or someone who's always the opposite of it. Or are there moments in life where maybe you're a little bit more selfish or you're a little bit more like you and I have had conversations about like periods in our careers when we've gotten a little bit too sure of ourselves and we acted in a way where like nothing would affect us. Like we were above it. And those types of things are real within people, but if you handle it properly, there's seasons to it, or there's moments of it, and you have to kind of harness it and corral it the right ways. And there's ways to look inwardly and there's ways to look outwardly. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about with this entire episode, but it's a constant toggle. And I don't know, like I have a 2-year-old at home. Absolutely external limelight. Everything is because of the world around him. He gets pissed regularly.
And that's just because he doesn't really understand how things work or role. And we'll get into that at some point. Our role as parents is to break that cycle and to get, I feel like as a dad, my job is to convince my kids that they are in 100% control of what happens in their lives, the good outcomes, the bad outcomes. My job is to get them to be independent, to feel like they can impact their lives and that things you don't wake up and things happen to them. They make things happen. That's my job as a dad.
Yep, exactly. So I think let's roll.
So there's a great book that I love. It's the title of it is Succeeding When Others Fail. And if you don't read the book and you just read this one chapter, which was a life-changing chapter to me. And I like you, I've read hundreds of books, business books, nonfiction books, and very few of them changed my life. Very few of them even change any habits at all. A lot of them are you kind of forget about them. But this chapter has really stuck with me to the point where I made every single person who worked for me for about 7 years read this chapter from this book. So when you started, you would get a copy of this before you even started. We would send it to your house along with your new hire paperwork, and we would ask you to read this chapter and come ready to talk about it. And I would talk about this chapter at our new hire orientation to set the culture of this is important to me, and this is important to our company and our culture. And especially in home building, a customer doesn't care why you missed their settlement date and why they have movers lined up and they didn't get to move in that day. They just don't care about your excuses. You need to you either got it done or you didn't, and you need to own it. And so this chapter speaks to Julian Ritter, who is a kind of a Hall of Fame psychologist. We like to talk about lots of psychologists on this, but he's the father of the term locus of control. And locus of control really just means a mindset of do I believe I'm in control, or do I believe others are in control for me? And the other common nickname for locus of control is the Limelight Effect. So what Julian Ritter found through a series of studies was that when people perform well on a task and receive praise, they start to develop a self-image. And the opposite happens when they perform poorly. And there was a small minority that can take no credit for their behavior or results, good or bad. So no matter how strongly or poorly they performed, they fail to recognize themselves as agents of change. And the funny part of this chapter is Ritter was, and this is a very small minority, Ritter received a major award for all of his work on this. And in his acceptance speech, spent the entire speech explaining away his success almost in an irritated manner and refused to take any credit for his findings. So the irony of all of it is this guy spent a career defining external limelight people without knowing he was one of them, which is fascinating.
It was almost like he was just your cranky granddad when he won the award, like chastising people for not recognizing all of his other great work, which was hysterical. Like you and I both took away from that piece of the article just is how ironic and funny it was. What's interesting to me about this is you sent me this article more than a decade ago. And what's funny about it is 15 paragraphs in, they mention one of my favorite characters in the history of like American television or literature, George Costanza. And for some reason, the first 10 or 15 lines just always turned me off. Like, I'll come back to it. It seemed too heavy. Like it really early mentions Noam Chomsky, and then it talks about Ritter. And it's just like, I'm not in the headspace for this. And I always put it down. And what's funny is I finally read through this thing and I'm like, wow, this is what perseverance is all about. This is such a great article. Like, I can't get something more highly recommended if it came from you, right? Like, it's a pretty good source. Like, this is great to make everybody read it. And for some reason, like, I couldn't get it through my thick skull that I needed to read this. And when I finally read it, I'm like, that's what all the hype's about.
No wonder Ian liked it. It's hilarious. And that was a very good example of internal limelight right there, Frank. So,
right.
Picture a limelight at a play, and the star is there, and there's always a spotlight on them. People either shine the limelight on themselves in control, good or bad, or they shine the limelight away. They want to distract you and push you away. So the internal limelight, to say someone has an internal limelight, those are people that take full responsibility for events in their lives, and they see themselves as the central participant of their outcomes. And someone who has an external limelight interprets events in their life as luck, fate, others' actions, random incidents, society's rules. There's George Costanza, right? And another favorite of mine, you talk about favorite characters, fictional characters. One of mine is Uncle Rico in Napoleon Dynamite. He's absolutely one of my favorite characters ever. And again, he is George Costanza. He is all of us a little bit. Uncle Rico spends the entire movie talking about if he could go back, how things would be different. He lives in the past. And people with an external limelight tend to live in the past. You know, Rico is always, if coach had put me in things, you better believe things would be different. You know, we'd take state, you know, I'd be in a hot tub right now soaking it up with my soulmate. And he spends the whole day even trying to buy a time machine online. He's so desperately, you know, taking videos of himself throwing footballs. He can't ever let it go. But again, I think we love Uncle Rico's because we know Uncle Rico's. We know them all the time. I have a few friends who I nickname Uncle Rico sometimes because they get caught too much talking in the past. And with some people, it's incredibly sad. My Uncle Tori, long since deceased, but he was one of my favorites, and he spent all of his time griping about, he had he had a good job at Ford, and he came over to work at my great-grandfather's business. It was a coking and coal kind of a business. And he left a good job with tenure, went to work for my great-grandfather, and ended up hurting his back. And my great-grandfather's business ended up having to sell out, so there wasn't the same future there. And he lost all that tenure. He spent 30 years of his life talking about that decision, how I should have never done that. And every time he'd have 4 or 5 beers, he'd start griping at his wife about it. And I just always looked at that like, that's so sad. You know, look, man, you made a decision, move on. Like he could not see his future. He could not see that he had 30, 40 years left of his life to go make other great decisions. He just dwelled on that decision. And I don't know if you had anyone in your family who did a lot of that, but that I always find that very sad when I hear people so focused on the past.
So I'm going to go backwards and I'm going to come forwards. The definition that we have written down in our notes for external limelight is this: interprets events in their life as luck, fate, or others' actions, random incidents, or society's rules, etc. The outside world is controlling you. You don't have control over it. Another way to state that is you're not taking accountability. You're physically not taking accountability. You're blaming all this other crap on others. And what I've noticed in my life, and I think it's one of the real gifts I've had in my life, is an ability to look at that and realize it's sad. Like, as you were saying a second ago, that you would see your poor uncle and you'd be like, it just kind of sucks. He's great, but he can't see that this is holding him back. And thankfully, you and I have the ability at a young age to kind of look at that and be like, that's not going to be my life. There's thousands of things we can go into with this, and like where it kind of comes through your life, and how you take control of it. There's a scene in Michael Clayton where Michael Clayton's in the car with his son. You remember? Did you watch that movie? Did you like that movie as much as me?
Yeah.
So there's a scene where his brother is like, once again, screwing up real bad. He was druggy, alcohol, all this stuff. And they ended up like losing a restaurant and a bar that he was supposed to run. And Michael Clayton stops and tells his son, when you see your uncle and there's kitchen sinks come flying out of the sky and they land in his lap, he goes, that isn't going to happen to you. That's not going to be your life. You're too strong for it. And I really love that moment in that movie because it's kind of a weird example. Like the first time you hear it, you're like, what the hell is he saying? But you make, it's basically this argument. You're going to take control of your life because you're smart. You don't make excuses and you kind of have control of it, which I thought was really interesting. The other thing I've noticed, Ian, is the people in my life who are bitter, disenfranchised, are the ones that have the external limelight that rules. Like, they're focused on high school football and they're 60. They're focused on the bad job or the bad boss. And it's a life of bitterness and disenfranchisement. And if it goes really wrong, it turns into something like the Unabomber, who has like a moment where they're like, the world was stacked against me. And it kind of comes out that way.
There's someone else in my family, I'm not going to say exactly who, but for 25 years has never had a good boss. And they've had 15 bosses, and they're all idiots. Every single one of their bosses they've ever had is a complete moron who doesn't belong in the position, is incompetent, and has no right to manage them. And
just to clarify, they didn't, and this person never worked for Ian or me, just to clarify.
This is a person in my family in Michigan. And, and you just listen and you're like, have you ever put two and two together that the only common element out of those 15 bosses is you? You're the only common element. Like if you went out of your way a little bit to get along with your manager early, rather than assuming they're all morons and starting friction right out of the gate, maybe you wouldn't be talking about some of these things. Because I don't know, I've had lots of bosses, so have you. I could tell you some good I took away from every single one of them. And I've had some bad ones, but I could tell you good that I took away from all of them, and I've found a way to make it work with all of them. But what the hell is the point of complaining about it? If you're complaining that much, go find another job. You're in more control. And that's the thing. This person I'm talking about has worked for the same organization for that entire time. And it's like, you have choices. You can pick up and go. You're a free agent. Do something about it. If your organization only hires moron managers, if that is a true premise, which I don't believe, but if that is a true premise, find an organization that hires not morons.
So I'm gonna use the push and pull of my mom and my dad. You've met both of them multiple times. My mom is like the most optimistic person in the world. And she's probably has way too much of an internal limelight. Like she always thinks everything's her responsibility. That's just kind of how she is. She overdoes everything and she always takes ownership of it. And she tries to like overwork every situation because of the fact that she's, that's just how she is. She's just a giver. And then my dad is kind of on the opposite side. It's not as bad as your Uncle Rico or your Uncle Tori or Uncle Rico, but, kind of the coulda, shoulda, woulda stuff. And what I was fortunate to learn from watching my mom do it and watch my dad do it is I think I pick the right amount for me that's kind of in the middle. There's a side of me that's still my dad. And there's a side of me that's my mom, but I had to find the right spot for me. That's kind of it's a toggle between both of them. And what's funny, Ian, is one of the best days of my life, 22 years old, it's 1997. My summer internship's ending. I'm going back to college. And my dad and I have a conversation and he's like, hey, you want to get together? We can, meet up on Saturday. I'm like, all right, perfect. And the way that we usually would spend time together is we would go to work. And my dad's self-employed. He has an electrical contracting company. So I met him and I jumped in his van and we went and did a job, and we're done at like 10:30. I'm like, all right, what's next? He's like, that's it. I got a light day. It's like, okay. He's like, you want to go to a coffee shop? And this is before Starbucks, right? It was like on every corner. I'm like, all right, cool. He's like, I wired this coffee shop. It's down by the beach. Let's go. And what was funny is we were having a conversation about like regrets. And we were having a conversation about like going into my last year in college and talking about something specific. And I'm like, man, I wish I could go back and do this part of high school again. And my dad, who's on the opposite side of this, who's usually the one that is, the external limelight, goes, you want to say that about college? And it just smacked me in the face of, wow, I'm doing it and I'm being called out. And it was kind of a springboard for like my last year in college, which turned out to be this incredible year of college for me. And it's the one I always think about. But it was because he was usually on this side and he delivered that message to me. It kind of pole vaulted me into something really cool and set me up for just an awesome year of college where I had zero regrets.
I think that's beautiful because when people get caught in the past with external limelighting like you were, where you're thinking about high school and wanting to do it more, they're missing what they should be living right now, what they should be enjoying right now. And in 5 years, they're going to be talking about how, man, I wish I'd have played 2021 a little bit better, because they were so focused on how they played 2019 wrong. And it just never ends. If you can't get out of that cycle of regretting things in the past and making excuses for why they didn't go right, you don't enjoy what you're going through, right now. So I think a good way to start into this is think about some choices. When you think about internal limelight, someone with an external limelight feels like their career is something that is preordained. It just kind of happens to them. Whereas someone with an internal limelight believes that every single choice they've ever made has led them to exactly where they're at, and they would take none of them back. the good, the bad, the ugly, any of it. You just believe I needed that. I needed to overcome that. I needed to, kind of like Jordan needed the bad boys to kick his ass a few years. He wouldn't take that back because it made him who he was. I think with internal limelight, you look at it and you say, if you want to know if you are, you should be able to look at 9 or 10 flashbulb moments of your career that led you here, that you were in control of, decisions you made that made a difference. So I'll start with one. I saw a GE career day. I had missed, I should have been paying attention to all the career days that were coming, but GE was high on my list of companies that I would be interested in working for because they had leadership programs. I wanted to go anywhere that had a leadership program. IBM had a great one. Intel had a great one. GE, Procter & Gamble had a really good one. And they were always there. And I missed the fact that GE's day was that day until I walked by and there was like 20 minutes left. So if I'd have gone home to put on a suit and got my resumes and everything, I would have missed GE's career day. So I was like, well, screw it. I had on Champion nylon shorts, sneakers, a t-shirt, and a hat on backwards. And I walked in.
The 90s equivalent of what you wear to work now.
Pretty much I wore what I wear to work every day. Still, that's accurate.
Who knew your best moment was going to come out then?
Yeah, that was literally the nicest I ever dressed the rest of my career. Anyway, I go in there, I got a hat on backwards. I got my backpack and I was like, F it. What do I have to lose? I'm going to go in here and shake some hands. And so, GE their career day was outrageous. Because at the time GE had like 12 business units. So every one had these huge sections, so there was like the aircraft engine section, the medical, and it was very intimidating. And every kid in there had on a nice suit, resumes, a portfolio with, everything to show. And I had shit. I had a backpack with nothing in it to show anyone. And I just walked around until I saw tables that were looking for sales because I wanted a sales job. And I would just wait in line and walk up and shake hands and say, I missed you. And, I'm glad I'm here, though. I'm Ian. Let me tell you about myself. And I just went from table to table in sales until one of them, just put my name into a slot. I'm like, I don't have a resume to give you, but I can bring one tomorrow. And it was kind of shocking that they even did it, but it got me in. And that was a decision that I made on the spot that led to an offer that led to a lot of really big things in my life. But I could have walked by. I could have said, you're not dressed for it. You're going to look like an asshole walking into that room with 200 kids in nice suits and you have a hat on backwards and a backpack and sneakers. Like, you're going to look like an asshole. And at that moment, I just thought, I don't give a shit if I look like an asshole. I will regret it more if I go back to my fraternity house and sit on a couch and watch Jerry Springer and think I should have walked in there. So I have nothing to lose at this point.
That's it. So I'm going to tell a similar story. And it was about, you picked like how to go to GE and like promote yourself, even though you weren't really prepared to do it. And you kind of missed the moment, but you didn't let it go by. I was in college, the College of Building Construction that I was in at the University of Florida, like they promoted commercial construction. So building structures, building the Wynn Hotel, building like one of a kind, beautiful buildings around the world. And I decided that I was going to go work for Ryan Homes and we were going to build the same house over and over again. And I was going to do something that they thought was beneath someone who would be graduating with this major, especially someone who was at the top of the class. And I got a lot of flack for it from professors. And the line I put in here is, like Biggie said, considered a fool because I dropped out of high school. Like, I literally people looked down their nose at me because I made this decision. But the way that I looked at it, kind of like you said, screw it, I'm going to go do this job fair and I'm going to do it in sneakers and I'm going to prove to them that I belong. For me, it was the exact same thing. I said, this is the best course of action for me. And I'm in charge of my life, not this teacher, this professor. And I'm married to a professor. She's friends with a bunch of professors. Like, by and large, they aren't that happy. So like, I was basing my happiness based upon someone that was in a role of responsibility and power. But now that I have perspective, I realize what the hell was I listening to these people for anyways?
Yeah.
But I didn't know that then.
Yeah. But it
turned out to be kind of like you going into that job fair, turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made.
And it impacted the next 25 years of your life.
And my guess is it's going to impact every moment from then until I die, because I picked the course of action that was best for me.
So when I got promoted from my first management job, sales manager, I was maybe 25. I was a young kid, right? I'd only been with GE for 3 years. The top sales guy in our office, who now reported to me, was bitter. He was not happy, and he made it clear he wasn't happy. How could this happen? He doesn't have the experience. He doesn't have the results that I have. He doesn't blah, 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 blah. How is he qualified? And these were all fair points. Right? I'd been with the company 3 years out of college, all that. But here's how I got the job. About a day before, 3 really big executives were coming into town. These are guys that reported into Jack Welch. They were coming around on a city trip. So these are, high-level senior executives, and these kind of guys were kingmakers. And they were coming around to see how Chicago was going. But someone was delegated from every business to get up and give a state of the market. So a guy got up and talked about what's going on in hospitals. A guy got up and talked about what's going on in the power industry. Another guy got up and talked about aircrafts. So there was a finance guy there. So I was in Chicago. 24 hours before this, I was planning to go. It was mandatory. There was hundreds of people at this event that would sit and watch, but only a handful presented. 24 hours before, I was asked to give a presentation. And the reason I was asked is because our senior most guy, the guy who didn't like me getting the job, turned down giving a presentation. Didn't want to. He's busy. He's got a big account he's working on. It came up with a bunch of reasons, but the truth was he wasn't a great presenter, and he was scared to present in front of all these senior executives. And he was 25 years older than me. He was 50 years old at the time. So I'm like, shit, that's tomorrow? You want me to do this? I cleared my whole schedule. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up all night. I put together a ridiculously good PowerPoint with images, and I put some humor in it. And I talked about strategy and what I was doing to build accounts and how we were pulling. And I made suggestions that we should quit playing around the paper industry. It's going away. We need to get into oil. I kind of put myself out there. I did some aggressive stuff telling these executives that we were slow on moving to where the business was moving. They asked me a few questions. I had some funny quips. I made them laugh. I made the whole room laugh. Literally 3 days later, I was in Atlanta interviewing for that management job. The kingmakers were like, give that kid a job. He's great. But the guy who was bitter about me getting the job passed on doing that presentation. He could have done what I did. And instead, he offered an alley-oop dunk to me. And the one thing I was better at him at, which was public speaking, I was very good at it. He lobbed an alley-oop pass to me, and I stuffed it. And he lost. But he couldn't get over the fact that they gave me that job. And I could have said no. I could have said, I got a lot going on. I don't think I could put it together. It's only 24 hours notice. So one person made a decision and the other person made a decision, and our careers went completely different directions. And he blamed everything but himself.
It's funny because I put a different example in here in my notes, but I'm going to use a different story based on what you just talked about. Like Ryan Holmes and GE were on opposite ends of the spectrum in the late 90s, early 2000s on technology. Like I was talking to you about like e-faxes in like 2000. Yeah, I was talking about e-faxes in 2005, like the shocking new technology. And we're like, we were using that in GE in the 80s. Yeah. So like behind the times, right? So like they didn't have a PowerPoint presentation, like except at the annual meeting. So, but I was going to tell a story about how I found myself in the worst communities, and I always had a chance to prove that I was really good. And this happened over and over again, but this happened after I was a new project manager. I was still like an assistant. It was in like my 6 or 9 months of training. And we had to present, and there was a couple of people from corporate that came to the meeting, and I brought my presentation bound, printed, bound, and like laminated. And I put it in like a deck where they could flip through it with me and I could talk to them. Like everybody else just kind of showed up and winged it off a set of notes. And I did that. And that was probably the first time I got recognized as being different than everybody else. I wasn't told to do it. No one said like, this is the program or just jot your notes down. Like I was like, I mean, I've graduated from college. They required I had a laptop. They showed me how to print things. I'm using this to my advantage. And I showed up in that meeting and I remember not too far after that, I got promoted and things started to happen. The other thing, Ian, that's kind of along the same lines is I constantly got put into crappy communities and I didn't bitch. I would get a lower quota. So if I did really well, it was easier to make money. And like, I always turned them around. And like, 9 months later, everyone's like, well, Frank gets the easy communities, but they were always broken when I got there, but I didn't bitch. I said, all right, this is the opportunity. This is what's best for the company. This is what's best for the division. I'll just go do it. And then I always turn those things into it. Like everyone would use the term a candy shop, but it wasn't that way when I got there.
And it's funny, Frank, it's easy for us to sit here with hindsight of 20 some years of business and be these sages up on a mountain talking about how we made all these great decisions and how we're always internal limelight.
I made tons of dumb ones too.
The truth is I'm not always internal limelight. I preached this for years in my business. I made everyone read this chapter. I've read it thousands of times myself. And on a daily basis, I catch myself external limelighting. I'll write something and I'll be like, this is really good. And then it doesn't get much engagement. I'll be like, the algorithm changed. It had to have. There's no way this got so few views. Or I'll see someone who I think is a shitty writer, but they have tons of engagement. And I'll be like, how in the world? They must be cheating somehow because they suck at writing and they got all. I do this all the time. Then I have to catch myself and be like, cut it out. Like, no, that's bullshit. You need to write better. You need to write more. You need to, I don't know. Do you, how often do you external limelight? I feel like I do it every day and I have to catch
I feel like we do it together with this podcast. Like the story you told me the other day about your friend that started a podcast and has 30,000 subscribers and he started about the same time we did. And like we pat each other on the back about how we're doing with this, but it's like, it's a slow grind. And I think
that's
the reason
funny in that conversation, we tried to explain it. Like, well, we
justified it.
He's in the religious.
We absolutely justified it.
It's a different niche. He's in the religious area. He spent a little money on marketing. Maybe that's it. We were trying to come up with reasons why they were smoking us and they started after us. When really we should have just said, maybe they're putting out some really good content. We should check it out, see what they do.
Right. But it's like, I think the majority of the time you and I live in the internal. But from time to time, everyone lives in the external, especially if something isn't going the way you think it should go in your head. And what I can tell you is like, I've been in business for 12 years. The first 6 or 7 are freaking awful. They're just awful. And like, there's a lot of like, this isn't working. This isn't happening the way it should. I should be getting better. But it's like, you just kind of realize eventually that after you bitch and complain to yourself and you're just tired of it, you realize I wasn't good enough yet. I'm better now. I have better talent around me. We have better terms with banks. We figured things out. Things I was scared of, we've embraced. Like those are the reasons that we're better than we were a decade ago. But while you're living through it, it's scary. So you just make a damn excuse and you blame somebody else. And that's where I think the rub comes in for what is and what is not external versus internal limelight.
I think you and I are both the same in that sports really shaped who we are.
Sports and our parents.
And we both like to hire athletes, former athletes that were on sports teams, because we know that we're going to get a certain traits from them because sports is just such a kill or be killed kind of an environment, the tryouts and putting in work to make teams. And I know one of my earliest memories of really being forced into an internal limelight, I had progressively gotten better at hockey and made better and better travel hockey teams. And that meant I got to play with some of my best friends. And specifically my best friend, Mike Cullen, who was a way better hockey player than me. But I was always on his team, which was cool. And then I got cut from a really big travel team with all of my friends on it. And I felt like I showed out at that tryout. I felt like I was better than the kid that made the team. And I was pissed on the way home. And I was telling my dad, this is bull crap. The coach must be friends with, Mike's dad, Mike Chody, the kid that made the team. And I was external limelighting everything. Did you see in the checking drill, I knocked him down 3 drills in a row off of his skates. And my dad was great. He was just kind of like, how's your skating? How'd you think you skated backwards? And I'm like, I wasn't a good backward skater. And I'm like, I probably wasn't one of the best in that drill. And he's like, how often does a defenseman skate backwards? And I'm like, well, most of the time you skate backwards as a defenseman. And he's like, all right, well, how'd you think your slap shot was? I'm like, it was pretty hard. And he's like, did you lift any? I'm like, I'm not real good at lifting it yet. And he's like, were the other kids lifting it? Because is it important to lift a slap shot when there's a lot of guys laying on the ice and you got to get it over them from the point? And he just asked me a bunch of pointed ass questions. And then the killer he was like, how often do you rollerblade to school? Because every day when we're dropping you off, I see Mike Cullen rollerblading in with his backpack on. He skates to school every day. He skates home. He's like, in fact, Mike skates over here every time he comes over, and I drive you to their house. Right? I was a chubby little kid. Mike was in great shape. He's like, I don't ever see Mike Cullen not in rollerblades. He's the best skater on the team because he works hard. And he just systematically crushed me to where it was like, you didn't work hard enough to make that team. You just want to be out with your buddies. And it really made an impact on me, Frank, to where like that whole winter, I would be shoveling snow off our driveway and taking hundreds of slap shots, just destroying our garage door, getting better at the things. I started rollerblading to school. I started rollerblading everywhere. But he really made an impact on me where he didn't let me feel bad for myself in that moment, right? Even though he maybe was talking to my mom and saying, this is bullshit, he ain't got cut, he was better than Chody or whatever it was. He didn't let me do that. And it was one of those defining moments in my life where I was like, hard work is going to lead to something better.
Yeah, it's funny because coaches aren't responsible for parenting you. They're just responsible for coaching you. So sometimes your parents need to back that up. Like I remember telling my mom I had a dream to play in the NFL. And my mom was always the most supportive person. In 7th grade, she's like, really? Are you sure? And it was a nice way of saying, I don't think you're good enough. But I realized I wasn't good enough as a 10th and 11th grader playing varsity football down in Broward County, where tons and tons of like college and pro players are. And I dedicated my junior year and my summer leading up to my senior year because I wanted to play and I wanted to excel as a senior. And what's funny to me, and is the thing I thought about with this and in the same example, was I had done all the work and I had gotten better, but I didn't believe it. And I got into the shoots and I played against somebody and I didn't beat them. Like it was kind of a stalemate because that person and I had stalemated for the last 2 years. So I still thought I was his equal. And my football coach said to me, he goes, Cava, what the F? You've dedicated yourself. You've worked hard. You should destroy this guy. And what happened in that moment is I was like, I believed it because I put in the work. I did the slap shots. I did the equivalent of the rollerblading, but I didn't believe that I deserved it. And as soon as I knew like, oh no, that you're right, I should dominate this guy. And I started kicking his ass. And then it was like, that's the cool thing about sports is you can't fake it. If it's not good enough, you're not going to make the team. You're not going to get on the team. But if you do the work and you internalize it, you're rewarded. And I think that's why we both love sports. And then you have the encouragement from good coaches that say, you're not holding yourself accountable enough to what you should be capable of. And I know that's what you love about coaching. It's what I loved about playing. It's the best part of it.
And it's, you talk about the weight room in football and it's similar in other ones. What's beautiful about sports is you can see the work translate immediately onto the field. And so when you can tie those two together, I think it makes you more. So if I work out a lot more and all of a sudden I'm beating someone who wasn't working out, I see that I did something, I made a decision and committed myself to something that led to an outcome that I like. Then if I go get my ass kicked by somebody and it was a bad outcome, I still have that connection in my head saying, I must not have worked out as hard as him, right? He must have worked harder. And so it just kind of, for me, it was baseball, it was batting cages too, right? I was same with you with the weight room, but batting cages, the more time I spent in a batting cage, if I had blisters on my hand, I usually had a good baseball game in varsity. And if I didn't have blisters on my hand, I wouldn't have a good game because I wasn't taking the cuts that week. And all of those things translated when I got a job or when I was at college and I needed to study. It always was in the back of my head that more hours will lead to better outcomes, more effort, more grind, more persistence. So sports for me created who I am today in everything I do.
You and I both feel like I would point to my parents, one, and then sports too is like what helped to shape me and who I am. So I want to also talk about this in a slightly different way about external and internal. So my mom was a hypochondriac. She always thought if you like put a drug or anything in your body, you were going to immediately die or you're going to be addicted for the rest of your life. So I wasn't like allowed to do, like they strongly discouraged me from using alcohol or drugs and things along those lines. And like using steroids, like I knew there was kids that were using them and I didn't, and I refused to. What I did instead is I just went all in. Like Nicole and I went to the GNC in the mall and my mom found that I had GNC stuff and she like yelled at me and threw it away and told me I wasn't allowed to use it. But I got really good in a short period of time. And I remember being home and the voices of one of my friends' dads left a message for my parents about the strong rumors coming out of our high school that I was using steroids. Like there's really strong rumors that Frank's using steroids. So my parents pulled me aside and they asked me, I said, I'm absolutely not. The only thing I'm using is the hot stuff that you saw in the bathroom that you threw away. And I'm not using that anymore. I'm working out really hard. I'm eating a ton of food. I'm doing all this other stuff, but I'm not doing that. And they believed me because they knew it was true. And, but I remember right there, like the internal versus the external, and these are more factors than Limelight. But I think it's relevant for this reason. I remember right there thinking, that's bullshit. Like, I can't believe this fucking guy left a message on my parents' phone. He never asked me. He went right to my parents. And in addition to that, I was like, his son sucks. His son isn't working. His son doesn't play. And like, it's crap.
Is this kid at the same position as yours?
No, but, and you know all these people, but
there was some bitterness that you were playing and his kid wasn't, and you had grown up together and all of a sudden Frank's stronger.
Ian, I don't know exactly what it was, but there was something there. And what I immediately looked at that was this. I deserve this because I fucking worked harder. I deserve this. I put in the time and I'm going to enjoy it because this is the last shot I got at high school football and I want to have fun with it.
Yeah.
And the other thing was he's wrong. He's an adult. I'm told to respect those people, but that is just a noise that's outside of my head that I'm going to block out because it isn't true. And if I ever got tested or anything like that, I would have passed. And like, it doesn't matter. And I think what ends up happening with some of this stuff is you start to realize, and this comes down to exactly what we're talking about. External factors and things along those lines can crystallize within you. And then you can look outward and just say, I'm not accepting it. I'm not listening to it. I'm not letting that excuse stop me. I'm going to persevere because or in spite of. And that was one of the first examples that I remember of that happening.
That reminds me of that story that your dad told me about the time your high school principal called and said there were strong rumors out of Douglas that Frank is cross-dressing at night. Do you want to tell that story?
He is a dick.
So let's get back into the Limelight Effect. So there are a couple of little nuances with this. So people have a tendency to take credit for the good, right, and explain away the bad. So they are internal Limelight when they do something good. That was me, that was me, that was me. And they are external Limelight when they screw something up. The externals in studies have a lot more anxiety than internal limelights. And that's because they feel like they're not in control. They feel like the world is out to get them. So an external is someone who's going to wake up and say, what have I done to deserve this? Whereas an internal says, I don't like my reality. What can I do differently to try to get a different result? So there's that's an interesting part of this effect, whereas in the externals, what have I done to deserve this? That's very Costanza. That's very, there's nothing is ever George's fault. A woman opens the door on him after he was in the pool and sees his wiener, and he says, there's shrinkage, Jerry, there's shrinkage. Would you talk to her? Would you talk to her about it? Because he doesn't want to just hone up to the fact that he's got a tiny Johnson. There's the time he sleeps with the cleaning lady on his desk and his boss calls him out on it. And he says, what is that bad? I've worked in a lot of offices and people do it all the time. And he blames his boss for not being understanding of, what that is. There's that everything George does, it's someone else's issue. He lands a date with a girl because she thinks he's funny. And then he's got to go on a double date with Jerry. And he tells Jerry, you have to not be funny. Would it kill you to not be funny all the time? Because he can't just own up to the fact that he should do a great job with this new girl he's dating. He's got to already he starts pre-blaming before before anything bad even happens.
He's so convinced it's going to have a bad ending because he knows he's going to ruin it. He's trying to precede the event with give excuses along the way. And that's why I told that story about the high school football thing. It's like, I'm not willing to do that. And there's been other examples in my life where it's like, you could take that other route, but you choose not to. Costanza, we started off with this whole thing with Costanza because he's incredible. He's so funny, but it kind of is a personification of the worst things that we all think and feel. And we all think it and feel it. Like, Jeff Bezos is, the richest person in the history of the planet, more or less. And he's a human. He's also felt these things. There's pulls on all of us for the internal and the external. Is this an excuse or is it not? And that's just, you got to learn how to slay the dragon, but the dragon's there.
Is there a price to pay for being all in on internal limelight, Frank? Of this concept of extreme ownership? Is there a price to pay for people that are just all ownership all the time?
So you put two names in here like Goggins and Willenick, right?
They're kind of known for being ownership, own it.
So let's talk about both.
No excuses.
So why don't you talk about who they both are, and I'll tell you why I think they're bad examples because they put too much onus on it.
Well, former military, Jocko's a SEAL. Goggins, I think, was a Marine. I'm not quite sure, but Goggins was actually Goggins might have been a SEAL too.
He was a SEAL too.
He was a SEAL. So both of them known for their getting up early in the morning, working out, extreme ownership. They both have podcasts, and every time I see them talking, they're pretty much barking at you to get off your ass and do something. So that's kind of their brand, and it can be inspirational if I'm being lazy and not working out. I'd like to see Jocko showing me his watch at 3:70, 3:15 in the morning that he's doing pull-ups. Sometimes that gets me motivated. Sometimes I think, man, that would make me sleepy. But they've certainly built very big brands that are profitable around the concept of 100% ownership all the time, internal locus of control.
So I don't disagree with what you just said. And I think Jocko's better at corralling it than Goggins. I mean, if you look at it, Jocko had a more distinguished military career. He didn't have to lose 150 pounds to get into the military in the first place because he got fat like Goggins did. So Goggins is incredible, but he's also an extreme example where it's too far. So I'm going to utilize him, and he's in pop culture everywhere. So the thing with Goggins that I think is incredible is he's done some major things, but his job is a firefighter. Not the highest paid job in the world, and not a job that allows you to utilize a bunch of strengths that he clearly has. In addition to that, he's had somewhere between 3 and 6 marriages that have failed, and he's been remarried. So like, what's the cost on those things with extreme accountability and with, the locus of control? Do you really have that control if you are constantly getting divorced? You're getting married, you're getting divorced. And Ian, my favorite example of this, I read a book. I've told you about it. It's a book I have people in my business read. It's called Radical Honesty by a guy named Brad Blanton. And when I read it,
honesty or radical candor?
It was Radical Honesty.
Okay. Yeah,
Radical Honesty, Brad Blanton. And when I read this book 10 years ago, it was very hard to find. It's easier now to find it. Even on Amazon, it took like a month to get it back then. But like nowadays, you can get it in a day or two. But the reason I bring it up is the book's roughly 400 pages. For 300 pages, he just pounds you over the head how honesty is so important. And then on page 300, he admits that he's been divorced 3 or 4 times. And I'm like, oh, what the fuck? Like there's clearly a cost of being that honest. So like everything else in life, it's like you can't live a great life without eating ice cream at least some of the time. But if you eat ice cream all the time, you're not going to make the hockey team. So you got to pick and choose. So that's what I see about this extreme ownership is you've got to regulate it or it's just as bad as having none.
And if you're lactose intolerant, you should really keep the ice cream to a minimum.
Certainly don't eat onions.
Don't eat onions too. So there was a British study of 10-year-olds. They studied this group of 10-year-olds for locus of control. And then they went back and restudied them 20 years later as 30-year-olds. And the group that had an internal locus of control were significantly less likely to experience psychological issues as adults. And they were also significantly healthier physically because those with an internal locus of control saw their health, saw their lives in general, their relationships, saw them as things that they could control with their actions. Whereas in the kids that were already demonstrating, as early as 10, you can start to see kids that are either internal or external locus of control. And the externals really just they felt like they woke up every day and they were at the mercy of things that happened to them, which I'm not like that, so I can't understand it. But when I think of folks like that, I think, God, that would be a miserable way to live if I woke up every day and didn't feel like I was in control of my life. I can see where that would be a very dark place to be if that's how I believed life worked, if I believed fate was out to get me.
Again, this is one of life's gifts. We don't feel that way. And it's because of the environment we were born in, the people who raised us, the influences that were around us. There's probably nothing I have a harder time relating to than having no control over my life. And the things that I I'm a new dad, the things that I worry about, I think we can help control them. But what if my sons become alcoholics or drug addicts and they lose the control of their lives? My wife and I have talked about how scary that is, because in every role or responsibility in life, they should have a leg up on this and be able to control it. But what if they can't? And it's one of the scarier things that I worry about as a parent. It's what if they lose control of that? And you just don't know. Things could go that way. It's going to be a challenge you have to deal with if it goes there. But not having the control, not being able to set the frame, not being able to realize that I'm in control of something, it's more foreign to me than almost anything.
So there's a double standard with the internal locus of control. So
should we start with the double standard with ice cream, chips, sugary cereal, two guys that hold each other accountable so much, but the only way that I get up to work out in the morning is I have to have a trainer meet me at the house because I just can't do it on my own.
Yeah, I could tell anyone how to lose weight. I just don't want to do it.
Exactly.
100%. That's exactly right. Yeah. So the double standard is, so imagine you're late to a meeting that's important, and imagine a lot of bad stuff just happened. It was just a bad morning. There was a power outage, so your alarm clock went out in the middle of the night and the alarm didn't go off in the morning, so you didn't quite wake up. And when you went to take a shower, there was no hot water, so it was harder to get ready. And that day there was a bad car accident that took an extra 20 minutes normal. Everything went wrong that could go wrong for you. And you feel some of that as you're, walking in. You're feeling very, this isn't fair. This was just a set of terrible circumstances. So you're kind of attributing your bad morning to fate, to bad luck. But most of us, if we found a way to get to that meeting and we were there 20 minutes early and we were there when the meeting started and someone else rolled in 20 minutes late and dropped those 3 excuses, we would be looking at them like, what a turd. I can't believe they made us all wait and they showed up late. Those are all bullshit excuses. So we would cut ourselves a break knowing what we know, but most of us would not cut that same break to someone who went through the same challenges, the same struggle.
It's funny. 2 things I want to say here. I remember it was somewhere like early in college, my freshman year maybe, and I totally procrastinated. It was a book we had to read. It was an English class, and I read the whole thing, but I pulled up 2 all-nighters to get through it. And it was just terrible. And I remember complaining in the class, and this girl who had read it, who was more organized than me, she kind of said something back about my complaint, as she walked out kind of under her breath. And I realized the only way she knew that is I said it, and nobody gives a shit about your story. You're just making yourself look like an idiot. So I was able to kind of rein that in, and I kind of understood that. So what has that meant in life? I am notoriously bad at getting up, especially when I was younger. I would always go to bed late. I'd always miss things in the morning. I was always running late. I run late to damn near everything, including this podcast. But one of the things that I've learned is what to say, how to sell it, and how to package things so the outside world doesn't judge me as an idiot or a failure or a screw up. And some of these things you keep to yourself and you just keep them kind of quiet. But if you like the example of running late, if that story happened and I missed something or was behind, I would not use the 15 excuses because I know everyone would look at it like that guy's just weak. I would probably come up with something witty and just take it. And because nobody cares, all they care about is you're late and you've made them late. So, but that's where I think the limelight, the internal versus the external really shines through. But I think
the only thing to say in that moment is sorry for disrespecting everyone's time.
That's it, Ian.
You say something like that, you show that I know I wasted your time and it's on me. And let's kind of move to what's next. Because you're just gonna make it worse by bringing anything else up. They're already irritated. They're already thinking bad thoughts. So show that you genuinely feel kind of crappy for doing it.
And maybe our explanation of this is why I show up later than you to most things.
You are at least 11 minutes in disrespecting my time 90% of the time.
So let's wrap this sucker up.
Facts. So, I think what's important is understanding the concept and understanding when you're doing it. And the question to always bring yourself back to is, what am I in control of? What can I do to change the next opportunity? What could I have done differently? If you can just get good at asking yourself those 3 questions, you'll be far ahead of 80% of people in the business world whatsoever. What are you grinning about there?
I'm just thinking of a funny retort that I'm going to give you in a minute.
I can only imagine. From a leadership perspective, I think the words that you accept from your team go a long way in defining the culture. And that's whether you're coaching a sports team or that's whether you're leading a team in an office or you're starting a business. If you're the type of leader that accepts things like, I'll try, I'll do my best, you're going to have an external limelighting culture, because when things don't go wrong, those people are self-handicapping before they even start. They're saying, I'll try. Then when they miss a deadline and you say, what the hell happened here? They say, I never said I was going to do that. I said I would try. And look at all these things that got in my way. So as a leader, I was always highly sensitive to hearing words like try and do my best and we'll see. And I would just stop people and say, I'm obviously asking for something you're uncomfortable for. Do you need more time, or is this something you feel is impossible? And 9 times out of 10, Frank, they would say, no, I'll get it done. And they didn't even recognize they were external limelighting before they started. But it's important, I believe, as a leader to kind of exterminate that kind of language by calling it out every time you hear it. And I do the same with 10-year-old boys on baseball teams. If I say, go run poles, and they say, we'll do our best, that's not an okay answer. Like, no, go run 10 poles, go do it. Tell me you're going to do it and come back and show me you did it. So I think it's the same inside of an office with paying attention to the vocabulary of your team and checking it when you start to hear excuses.
Right. One of the things you put in the notes is a good company is an accountable company. And one of the things that's in our core values is we won't do our best. We'll do whatever it takes. And those are different. Those are that's the mentality of like, hey, we're going to set a goal and we're going to go get it. And that's what you have to drive towards. What I think, Ian, is the most interesting. You talked about coaching kids. I'm not to that stage in my life yet, but like, to me, the capstone class is raising kids. And if you don't know how to hold someone accountable or to get them to focus outside of themselves, you are going to be really struggle. You're going to struggle with kids. And I think that's a big reason why so many kids are coddled nowadays, is because the parents just don't want to, they want to be friends with their kids. They don't want to be parents to their kids. And I think that's a big part of it, is you have to utilize these skills when you're parenting, and you got to get little selfish 2-year-olds to look out past themselves and see other things that are happening and how it affects. And to me, that's where it starts. And it's like with my 2-year-old, with my infant, like, hey, you can't push him and you can't push him. You can't cough in his face. You have to think about something other than yourself. And it starts right there. And I, like my wife and I both think of, like, it's not too early. Like, you can't cough in his face. That is not allowed. Move away. Like, those are little things, but that's how it starts.
Yeah. And again, it comes sports, school, anything. I think when you want to get into parenting, you get into some of this helicopter crap that people do, where they are all over their kid on every quiz, on every homework assignment, everything they did. I'm more of the nature. I'm checking your grades. And if you didn't do your homework and you took a 0 on something, that's on you. And I want to hear what you're going to do about it next time. If you have a quiz and you need my help, and you waited until the morning I was about to take you to school to say, I don't understand the concept, that's your fault. Like, you should have talked to me earlier. That's not my job to follow up on these things. I think all those things. Last night we had a Little League baseball game. IJ was catching, dropped a third strike, hit the dirt, got away from IJ. The kid got to first. Would have been the third out of the inning. Ends up the next kid hits a home run, 2-run home run, cost us 2 runs. And it was a really tough play. And IJ didn't need me to be on his ass about it. So after the game, I was like, hey, man, tough. We always go through all the plays. I was like, that was a tough play. I was a curveball in the dirt. Those are not easy to block. And he's like, Dad, I needed to block that. That was on me. I should have kept that in front of me. I should have made that out. I cost us 2 runs. I didn't jump on him. I didn't say anything else. But it made me feel good. Like, you get it, kid. If you want to be a great baseball player, you need to understand that you do need to make that play. You don't need me to chew you on it right now, but you said what you needed to say.
That's right.
That's on me. I need to drill more.
So one of the things that I'm a new dad. Who the hell knows how this will turn out? But one of the things that I talk
highly likely it's going to be a disaster. No,
for sure. But one of the things that, like, I talk to my wife about is every human being needs struggle. You need struggle. And conflict, struggle, like it's mandatory. And I had it in my career, moving, trying things. School was hard for me. Sports was a big part of it. And my parents let me fail. And that's one of the things that I think you must do with kids. And it's like, you've done that clearly with IJ, is they must have failure. They must have struggle. Because if they don't have struggle while you're alive, they'll have struggle after you're dead. And you'd rather someone struggle early and learn how to overcome it than struggle late and have to figure it out. So but that is part of the process, because if you can teach, most of the time what you need to do is look inward. The internal limelight will get you through it.
Good companies are accountable companies. Good kids are accountable kids. Good parents are accountable parents. I think this whole thing is just, it's about accountability. And I'm touched by your we all need struggle, because truthfully, before this podcast, I had none in my life, but having to deal with you every single week has really brought more structure and struggle to my life. Just pulling you through this process,
clearly I'm up there,
carrying you through every episode, bumping and grinding our way through this. It's, I wouldn't trade you for the world. You are my only struggle in life.
It's good to know that this is taking a page out of your book. It's good to know that I'm up there with Costanza. I'm at the very, so I think the thing I think we should do to end this podcast is this. In the Limelight Effect, coming from the book, succeeding when you're supposed to fail, is the following quote. George points his limelight outward almost as a reflex action without even thinking about it. When he accidentally damages Jerry's car during another incident, he once again shifts responsibility to someone besides himself, this time to Elaine. You had to move the mirror, he complains. You just threw off my equilibrium. And the author writes, whatever that means. And in this scene, it's just hysterical. The whole thing's funny. He wrecks the car, the whole thing. And then because George is George and he has absolutely no regard for anyone other than himself, he tells Jerry, no. Let me get the bill. I ruined your car. And Jerry goes, yeah, that'll make us even. You're buying me a cup of coffee.
I think we have pounded home the internal limelight effect today, Frank. I hope you have an accountable day.
And you as well. It's good to once again see you and carry you through yet another podcast. Although I know you'll tell yourself something else. You use that external limelight to tell me how great you are.
You goddamn right. See you, dude.
See you, dude.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.